So we do have a disclaimer this week. Yes, we are getting into searching, which there's a couple of things that I just want to bring up about that. To start with, we're not going to teach you how to use databases, right? I think that's fair to say. What we're going to be showing you is how to construct searches in these databases, giving you some advanced search tips and tricks, but getting familiar with how to use some of these databases is really something for you guys to work through on your own. You may already be familiar with how some of them work, but if not, we will provide some sort of database tutorial tip sheet that you can go ahead and play around with or watch the videos and get familiar, because really the best way to learn how to use a database is to use it. And we want to focus on actually constructing the searches, because that is complicated in and of itself and is database specific, but also isn't. So that's one disclaimer. The other disclaimer is there are no standards of the right way to do searching for a systematic review. There are best practices. There's a couple of different ways out there. Rochelle is going to show you, for the most part, her way. I may interject with other ways that I've done things. I really don't know what Rochelle's going to show you, so this will be interesting for me. I don't know if the way I do things is the right way to do things. So this is just, we're going to try not to disagree with each other. It's not going to be an argument. It's just know that there are different ways to do things. And if Rochelle and I provide you with different things, it's not that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. These are different ways. And there are other ways out there. Because that's every time I talk to a librarian about, oh, how do you do searching? Or when you get your search strategy peer reviewed by somebody and you're like, why'd you do that? Or when we look at other systematic reviews and look at their search strategies, you look at it and go, why did you, I wouldn't do it that way. So this is just disclaimer for us, and knowing that we're going to provide guidance, but unfortunately there's no right answer to searching. Yep. I wish there was. It would make my life so much easier.
And probably make us irrelevant.
Maybe.
A little bit.
Maybe.
Yeah. I have an ongoing debate with one of my nursing faculty about the merits of Synonyms versus MEDLINE. And of course, we're both right.
Yes.
We're both right.
Yeah.
I know why she feels the way she does. I just think my way's better.
And we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about different platforms for these same databases a bit later. And, I have no idea which one Rochelle prefers
PubMed
or
sucks.
Why. So yeah, it'll be fun. But just, we'll try not to get heated about it.
Oh, there's a fight brewing.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm good for now.
All right, that was a long preface to a talk.
It was.
But we're good. So today's session is developing a search strategy, part 1. Part 2 will be next week. This week we're going to focus on sort of the tools you will need to build your search. And next week we'll focus on how to actually build your search, I think is the way we've laid it out. And we'll get there.
Yeah.
So starting with, you have to have a question. To answer a question, you have to have one. And good question formulation is important, particularly in systematic reviews, because you do have to have a very specific topic and a very strict outline to what your topic is and is not. I have Pico up on the screen. It's Pico or Picot. I will preface this by saying I'm a Picot hater. It's a stupid tool. But I'll explain what it is and why they use it, and its very few good things. So Pico or Picot is basically a way to formulate your research question in health fields. And it lays out the major components. So typically speaking, you have population, intervention, comparator, outcome, and occasionally time. And that's kind of the broad outline of what PICOT is. Do you use different P's or T's? Or C's or I's?
When I learned it, it was just PICO. PICOT came into play later.
Yeah. PICOT, I came across when chatting with a faculty member. She said, "Have you heard of peacock?" I'm like, "What's peacock?" So I went home and I started Googling what she might be talking about. Apparently it was PICOT. So that was a great moment. I know about it now. Don't love it, but it's okay. So really the problem with the PICO format is that it's rigid and it doesn't fit every need by any stretch of the imagination. As you can see here, we have a whole bunch of different types of systematic reviews, and each one has its own. So we have PICO with a little O, Cocoa Pop, PERD, PO, like really PCC. And these are all sort of attempts to force PICO to accommodate differences in searching needs, where the I could be intervention, but it could also be phenomena of interest or index test. The C could be comparator, control, or concept. C little o is condition. E is exposure. R is reference test. O actually usually stays outcome because it's a really important one. And I would say P is usually population. I've seen people use patient, but really same idea. And then D would be diagnosis of interest. So really, I mean, the formula is not super important. But broadly speaking, these are the kinds of chunks you'll be looking at in a health-based question. If you're doing a systematic review on a non-health question, obviously your pieces will be different. But what it comes down to in the end, is there should be 3 to 5 chunks to your question. Systematic reviews, I would say, lean more towards 4 or 5 chunks. Scoping reviews, 3 or 4. Undergraduate student questions, 1 or 2. But 3 to 5 pieces to a question. For instance, what are the experiences of ESL and non-English speaking immigrants seeking healthcare in Canada? I made this question up yesterday. I did not search it. I have no idea if there's information on this topic.
Oh.
I totally invented it.
Because I searched on it last night for later.
So sorry.
No, there's stuff. It's good.
Okay, good. Yeah, I didn't really intend that, but I'm glad you found things and I wasn't just horribly mean to you for no reason.
I would have given up on your example if I hadn't found anything.
Yeah. So there are, let's say, 4 chunks to this. We have experiences, ESL and non-English speaking, immigrants, there's 5, healthcare, and Canada. And I will take a moment and say Canada is a dangerous choice to use. As much as we love Canada and as much as this question requires it to be Canada, because healthcare in the US is totally different, limiting your search to Canada shrinks your results really, really, really fast. Because most publications are done in the States. They have 10 times the population we do, probably 10 times the publications. So you shrink your sample size fairly quickly. But healthcare questions, you don't have a choice. You have to stay within your system. You could probably compare Canada to like the UK a little bit.
Australia too.
Australia, but certainly not the US. But that's a question. It's specific, it has all the pieces, so you have your population, experiences. Yeah, I hate PICO.
Well, it's more of a qualitative or scoping review type question anyway, so it doesn't nicely fit into PICO.
Yeah, so PICO has its problems. But really, 3 to 5 pieces, be sufficiently specific while being broad enough so you don't get 0 results. I'm sure you can all formulate a question by now. You've been through the educational system at least far enough to get there, I would think. So, now that we have a question with 5 pieces, the next part, and a really, really important piece, probably the single most important thing in systematic reviews, is synonyms. Doing your searching in a systematic review requires synonyms, and I mean like long lists of synonyms that can go on for pages. So you have to have similar words or synonyms for each of the pieces of your question. So ESL, non-English speaking, could be bilingual, could be Chinese speaking. There's got to be, like, I'm making them up, but if you had Canada, even Canada has synonyms. You have to go through all the provinces. So you go, PEI, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and do each of those searches, which takes a while. If you're doing BC, you have to do BC and British Columbia. You have to pull all of those possible words into a single search, but you start by getting all your synonyms. I have had endless practice in figuring out synonyms for words. I'm good at inventing them too. People come into my office and speak a nursing language that I don't speak. I'm like, well, what about this word? And I start switching pieces around or making things up. I'm like, oh yeah, that's one. But if you don't spend your entire day looking at synonyms and reading thesauri, there are thesauri online. I love thesaurus.com. Sometimes it does a really, really good job of what it does. Occasionally, not so much. But it's free, it's easy to use, and it will look up synonyms for you. Don't use all of them, because not all of them are great. Yeah, I think newcomer would probably backfire pretty quick. I don't know that I'd search alien.
For searching newcomer and Canada, it's good.
So, you look through and you pick out the ones you like the most, or you think are most likely to appear in the literature that you want. And you start writing them down. So thesaurus.com is really good for your average word. So anything that's not super medically specific or super narrow, you can find in thesaurus.com. With the caveat, maybe the wrong word, I tried experiences in thesaurus.com and it failed me. It just did not get me where I needed to be at all. So try it in thesaurus.com. If it doesn't work out, my next favorite tool is databases, where I'll type in the word I'm looking for, and first of all, it gives you this nice list below the search box. Some of those I probably invented myself because my computer knows me, but it does provide you with suggestions of words. So experiences is a qualitative question, so you can use the word qualitative. You can look at interviews, attitudes, perceptions, any word that will capture what they might have done to get an idea of those experiences. You can also look through the actual titles and descriptions underneath them to find out what other words might have been used. So in this case, it didn't work out super great because you just see the word experience a lot. But if you scroll down, you'll start seeing more words that you might use as well. The last thing you can do in a database is if you scroll down the page on the left-hand side, you'll find something that says subjects or subject headings or synonym headings. And if you click that open, you'll find more words on your topic as well. So just options you can use to find words to use in your search. And again, you do need to have as many synonyms as you possibly can. While on the balance, being specific to your topic. So don't go too far outfield or you'll get results that make no sense. Okay, so that's synonyms. The partner to synonyms is controlled vocabulary. And controlled vocabulary was that day when I was in library school and they started talking about it. I'm like, oh my God, this is why I'm here. This is what I really want in my life. I got so excited that day. This was I'm meant to be a librarian. This is my fate. So controlled vocabulary is the super synonym. It is the concept that you put this word in a database and all of its other words that are related to it also come through in a search. And it's a beautiful thing. So if you were to search the word, breastfeeding, and found out that there was a controlled vocabulary term, breastfeeding, it would also include nursing, so that's an synonym for having a baby and nursing on it, having it nurse on you. I'm so not a baby person. I don't know why I chose that. But it has all the other words you can use for breastfeeding. It could have breastfeeding as two separate words instead of one word. Breastfeeding is one word, breastfeed. All of those words that are kind of close will come together under that one controlled vocabulary term. Does that make sense? Yes.
So if the word was breastfeeding and it's a controlled vocabulary, where would something like nursing fall under? Like
Yeah.
It's a synonym, sorry. So it wouldn't be in the same, it would have to be an additional search term, would it? Like to nurse versus breastfeed. Some people say
Yeah.
nursing, some people say breastfeeding.
So your controlled vocabulary term is just kind of like the alpha synonym for something. And it'll search articles for the word breast or for the word nursing as well as breastfeeding in that context. Sort of. So let me explain how they sort of came about, and maybe that'll explain better what they are. So I don't know how many people here have used a card catalog. I genuinely don't know how to use one, but I know the theory behind them, which is basically that any item can be searched on 3 factors. You can search it by title, by author, or by subject. And these subjects are assigned by the Library of Congress or by the Dewey Decimal System, and they're literally like 23 books in the Dewey Decimal. There's 4 Library of Congress. So there's 4 Library of Congress books that list all of the words they use to describe things. So dog or canine, we'll say the subject term is canine, includes dog, puppy, wolf, and it's the term they use to describe that entire concept. And every time a piece of information is added to a library, it's assigned several of these terms that describes its major components. So if the paper is on the experiences of ESL and non-English speaking immigrants seeking healthcare in Canada, its subjects might be ESL and non-English speaking. That might be one subject term. Lived experiences is probably one, because that's a subject term as well. Canada will be a subject term. Just those major pieces. And the words may not be, like they may not call it ESL and non-English speaking, they may have a word for it, but it captures that concept. And that's kind of the way they work. We've just moved from a tedious paper-based system to a digital system that is better, mostly, depending on the database you use. Does that make more sense? I'm not doing any better talking slowly this week, am I?
I don't know. I think I'm used to your pace.
Yeah. Okay, questions on the concept of controlled vocabulary. I'm not quite done with it, but if there's questions now, I'll answer them. Nope. I can't see faces, so I can't tell how many people are like, what? So, controlled vocabulary is often built in a tree-like system where the larger category can be broken down into smaller categories. So persons in MESH, which is medical subject headings, is the National Institute of Health's category of subject terms. It's their dictionary. In MESH, one of the subject terms is persons. Underneath persons, there's like 50 different varieties of people, including adult children, emigrants and immigrants, multiple birth offspring. It just breaks it down into smaller chunks that are medically relevant. So you get persons, adult children, emigrants and immigrants. That one also has a smaller branch, which is undocumented immigrants, and it stops there. So there's nothing more specific than that group. But it is built in a system that lets you go as broad or as narrow as you'd like in a topic. So persons, I feel like, is an irrelevant search because that's pretty much everything in every health database. But if you just wanted adult children, you could just type in adult children and get that concept captured fairly well. These are not the be-all and end-all of everything. You cannot replace synonyms with subject terms because, I suppose for a few reasons, subject terms are assigned by librarians who can only assign a few and don't always capture the entire meat of the article. And sometimes there's very similar subject terms in the same article or for the same idea. So one might be used and not the other. It's just a matter of, like, they're both catch-all systems. So the whole structure of a systematic review is the catch-all system. Use every synonym you can think of and then use every controlled vocabulary term you can find. And hope that between the two of them, they'll grab everything you need. So that's how they work. with just one more piece of information that's really important. If I want to write a paper, and I use the controlled vocabulary term emigrants and immigrants, and I want to capture with that term the idea of undocumented immigrants, I can tell the database to explode the concept, which is what that little plus sign means. It means capture this major subject term and any that fall beneath it. So if I exploded persons, I would capture all of those. If I explode emigrants and immigrants, I capture undocumented immigrants as well. You do have to tell the database to do that, with the exception of PubMed defaults to exploded.
Yes.
In most cases, you have to tell the database to explode a term so that it includes those ones below it, because it doesn't want to do that without you telling it to. But yeah, so that's kind of what they are and how they work. They're useful. They're not as great as I'd hoped they were in that day in grad school. It's like, oh, thank you. But they do their job fairly well. Okay. Pausing again for questions.
How many people have used controlled vocabulary when searching a database, whether it was using the MESH database or CINAHL headings or psychology thesaurus and PsycInfo? We've got a couple of hands. Yeah.
Okay.
For systematic reviews, you are going to have to use controlled vocabulary in addition to keyword searching.
Yeah, you have to. It's blanket rule. There isn't always a controlled vocabulary term for every idea. So if you don't find one, it's okay. Sometimes they don't exist. And not every database has controlled vocabulary. So Scopus doesn't use it. Web of Science doesn't, but we don't have that anyway.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're all different as well.
Yeah,
Which is
this
next
is where we're
week
going
when we get
next.
into translating searches between different databases. It's why you can't just copy and paste one thing from one database into another and hope it searches, because PubMed with their mesh headings will have different terms for things than CINAHL from Embase, and it's super fun.
Yeah. So that being said, there's lots of different versions of systematic or of controlled vocabulary. They are called different things. So you have to know the terms that sort of identify that it's controlled vocabulary. So in CINAHL, it's called CINAHL subject headings. Subject headings is a very popular word. Again, you see MESH, which is medical subject headings. You'll see the word thesaurus that usually indicates that it's a controlled vocabulary type.
Mtree,
Mtree.
just to be annoying.
Yeah.
Those Mbases.
So they all have different names. They all have different systems. You'll see MEDLINE and Cochrane and PubMed all use the same one. But apart from those three that use MESH, I can't think of any database that uses the same one as another one. They don't. Like, it never happens. So it's only those three that use the same subject headings. So,
Did you say MESH subject heading is the same as controlled vocabulary?
medical subject headings are the controlled vocabulary for the National Institute of Health, and it's used in MEDLINE, PubMed, and Cochrane. But those are the only databases that use the same subject headings. I can't think of any others that use the same one.
Just, and I know that you said you wouldn't teach us individual databases, but I was on, say, PsycInfo. Where would that be?
It'll be in the same place as it is on
Okay.
CINAHL, and it's probably called a thesaurus.
Yeah, it is called thesaurus.
There it is.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Which, when I first started using PsycInfo, I didn't realize that the thesaurus was the subject heading thing, so I wasn't searching PsycInfo using that because I didn't
Yeah.
really get it.
Yeah, so I'd say most databases it's called subject headings or thesaurus. You may occasionally hear it actually called controlled vocabulary, but mostly that's not the case.
And
Yeah, so that's where it is in CINAHL.
we will point things out to you. We are not blanketly opposed to showing
Yeah.
you things or teaching you how to use some basic things.
Well, and that's where the hands-on part comes in. We can actually come around and show you how to use the different tools. At one point, PsycInfo had 2 different thesauri. Does it still?
Oh, I don't
It
think
was
I was using
weird.
it.
Never did figure it out, but I could if I had to.
Oh no, that's ProQuest Nursing and Allied Health has two.
Oh, is that the one?
It has.
I hate that database.
You
It's
can
terrible.
search mesh and you can search the ProQuest subject headings, which is a pain, and why I never like searching that database for systematic reviews.
Okay, so in PubMed, that's where mesh is. If you're using subject headings in PubMed, talk to one of us. I find it's very easy to get lost in there and not to get your way back out. I don't know if you've seen that, but people start doing advanced searching inside the mesh headings and it just goes all wrong. So it's a little weird, but I don't love PubMed.
I love PubMed. Yeah.
Not a fan.
This is where that disclaimer comes in.
Yeah. MEDLINE. This is where subject headings are in MEDLINE. They're actually defaulted to turn on, so when you do a search of like one word in MEDLINE, it pops over to subject headings. I hate that default, but it's there for a reason. If you just want to search MEDLINE itself, unclick it and it goes away. But that's where they are there. Again, you'll find that they move around in different databases. So get to be familiar with the ones you know or the ones you use. And if ever you can't find it, you can go to the help feature or you can email one of us. So that is subject headings. They are super fun.
And necessary.
Yeah. So I think it's your turn now.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about search filters, which can be a way to potentially help you out with some of your searching. And I'll talk about what they are and some of the pros and cons and why you should or shouldn't use them. So when I say search filters, they also might be referred to as hedges or limits. So if you have used databases before and you've seen limits or filters in the database where you can click off, a certain age group or a certain publication type or study type, those are predetermined on the back end of the database to search for certain words and pull back articles with those words. So it's a quick way to filter out your search results and limit them. The problem with the database ones is that quite often you don't really know how it's doing that. PubMed with MEDLINE does give you some indication, and we'll talk about that in a second, but when you're searching for systematic reviews, we really recommend you don't use the database limits. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Okay. And it's because it's not as reproducible. So
Don't ever use database limits, even in regular searching. They do not do what you think they do.
if you're doing like quick searches.
The geography one is particularly bad.
Anyway, we are going to talk about them later when limiting for reviews and systematic reviews, because they can be useful for quick searching, but not for systematic review searching. But other search experts and institutions have been creating their own search filters and making them available for other people to use. So they're designed to be highly sensitive, precise, or a balance of both, which I assume we'll talk about next week, about search
I think I do a little
sensitivity. And so that'll make more sense later. These filters end up tested or validated when they are being used in systematic reviews. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of how you test or validate these filters. I have looked into it, and it's kind of a bit of a process, and other librarians do research on that and publish articles on that. I just know that some of the filters that I find are validated, which means they're a bit more trustworthy, but it still all depends on context. If you find one of these search filters and it looks really great, you have to recognize it was designed for a particular question, for a particular context, which may or may not be the same as what you want to use it for. So they're good, but is what I'm going to talk about. Like for example, one of the scoping reviews that I am working on is about health services for transgendered youth, and I know one of my colleagues in Halifax is working on validating a search filter for LGBTQ topics. And so I asked her if I could see it to see if I could use the transgendered piece, because my researchers didn't want the whole concept. So that's me taking a search filter and only using a piece of it, which means all the work that they're doing to validate it, I'm kind of undoing by just using a piece of it. But for my purposes, it's fine because I trust that it's going to do what I need it to do. So, should you use them? Well, it does depend. They can save you some time. So depending on your topic, especially if you're doing study design related things and you only want your systematic review to pull back randomized control trials, using a search filter for that could save you the work of having to figure out all of the synonyms for randomized control trial, all of the controlled vocabulary around them, and just using something that's already been made. Now, one of the problems with that is they do tend to be database specific. So you may find a really good one on randomized control trials, but you can only find the one for MEDLINE. And yet, as we will talk about later, you can't just search one database for your systematic review. So it saved you a little bit of work, but then you still have to either find it for another database or translate it yourself. So it might save you time, but it's database specific. And you still need to test it with the rest of your search strategy. So one of the other searches that I'm working on, I pulled a couple of qualitative search filters to try and get at that experiences concept, because if anybody else has searched on the topic of experiences, it's pain. It's almost impossible to define because the controlled vocabulary, you're piecing things together to make something capture this concept of experiences, unless you've specifically defined what you want from that. And so what I've been able to find by looking at other systematic reviews on this topic, by talking with other people, that using these two different qualitative filters that I have found could help me get at this part of the concept. And when I've done searching with it, it is pulling back the types of results that I want. So you do still have to test it, which we'll talk more about testing next week. So they can be useful. But it's also good to check in with a librarian to see if the types of filters that you want to use might be good, if we have recommendations on where to find them. I do have a list, a couple of slides from now. Have you used filters at all?
I am just using my first filter now for randomized control trials, and I used a Cochrane filter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does need to be translated. It's only available for MEDLINE. I'll just move it over. Yeah, they're really just there for specific kinds of cases. And
Yeah.
I know what you mean about qualitative searching. It's awful.
Yeah.
I have a list that I go through now. I'm like, it's phenomenology and narratives design and lived experience. Oh, it takes forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know about filters until November.
Oh.
I was so far behind. So I'm just starting to play with them this week.
Has anybody else used a filter? I can show you what I mean. This is PubMed's systematic review filter. So it's long and detailed. And you can see it's pulling different synonyms for systematic reviews. It's got a lot of extra stuff. It's only pulling back information from the titles, which is not great in my opinion. But we can talk about that later. So something like that is what I mean. Has anybody used one? No? Well, depending on what your topic and your question is, you may find a useful filter from one of these sites. These seem to be the main ones that keep coming up whenever I go look for them. You can also Google a piece of your question and the word search filter or search hedge, and see what comes back, because you'll probably find a bunch of library websites with subject guides that have posted things, or you may find articles that have been published talking about validating particular search filters on a particular topic. For the qualitative one, I think I found one through one of these sites, but then another, it was through an article that I found, that when you are using them within your own search, you do give credit to where it came from, which is always good practice. And I should say, there's probably not a filter out there for every part of your topic and your question, so you are still going to have to do some work. But depending on what you are trying to look at, a filter may save you a little bit of time and effort. So they're good, but be cautious. And if you're not sure whether you should use one or not, you should talk to a librarian, and we can give you some guidance. Any questions about search filters? No? Okay. All right. So now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about where to search. So with systematic reviews, you do have to make sure that the information that you're pulling is comprehensive, as Rochelle has talked about before, which means you have to look in many different places in different ways. And this is all to help reduce bias and to make sure you're being thorough. So you'll be searching in databases, you'll be searching in what we call gray literature, which we'll talk about down the road. You may be doing hand searching in key journals on your topic or in conference proceedings. You might be looking at reference lists of the articles that end up being really good. You may be having personal communication with the authors or experts on this particular topic. The idea is cast a wide net. So Cochrane, in their systematic review guidelines, they do consider bibliographic databases to be the most important place for you to search. Particularly, they do single out MEDLINE, which we've thrown that term around, and I'm going to talk about platforms in a few minutes. So when I say MEDLINE, I either mean PubMed or Ovid for the most part, Embase, and Cochrane Central. So that's what Cochrane considers to be like the 3 places you absolutely should be searching. And we'll talk more specifically about these and other databases in a few minutes. But first, I'm going to bring back this meme, which you may see a few more times throughout this session, because I think it's very appropriate, because a lot of times we throw the word database out there, and I don't think we all are on the same page about what we mean. I'm sure you've had people say database to you and have meant Google Scholar, which Google Scholar is not a database. It's a search engine, functions differently. Some people have said to me, well, I've searched in Science Direct, and I try and explain that Science Direct is not a database in the way that we consider a database, but then it's hard to explain because it does have journal articles in it and it's fee-based. So we get that terminology is confusing, and we will try not to get annoyed if you call something a database and we don't consider it a database. But that's just, I wanted to put that out there, that when we are talking about databases for this, we're talking more specifically about subject or bibliographic databases, or what are called citation indexes. And not being a super techie person, I don't want to go into the detail of how these particular things work versus how Google Scholar and the other things work. We're just gonna, when I say databases, this is what I mean. And so even between subject databases and citation indexes, where you can see examples at the bottom, subject databases are like MEDLINE, citation indexes are things like Scopus, which tend to be more multidisciplinary. There are differences of how you can search them, what they have in them, how they function. So even still, calling them both databases is just a blanket term. So, questions to consider when you're trying to figure out what databases you do want to search for your systematic review. So you need to consider, are the topics in your research question actually covered in this database? What types of materials are indexed in this database? And is this the only and/or best platform for this database? And again, we'll talk about platforms in a sec. So sometimes it's pretty obvious to know if your topic is going to be covered in one of these databases, but once you've gone beyond the couple, especially if they're health topics, there are ways that you can find out what journals or other materials are in a database. Usually, I find that out by Googling it. I don't know if you have other tricks of that, but you can get a list of the journals that are indexed in CINAHL, for example, which can be handy because maybe you thought CINAHL would be a good place to look, but when you sort of take a scan through their journal titles, your topic doesn't really fit. And so trying to make sure that you're searching the right databases is important because you don't want to waste your time building a search in a database that really isn't appropriate for your topic. And databases do have more than just published journal articles. Again, depending on the database, they may have things like conference abstracts, theses. CINAHL's got a whole bunch of extra stuff like CE materials and magazine articles. PsycInfo has book chapters in it. Trade papers. So there's more stuff than just journal articles in these databases, which is good and bad. When you're doing your searching and your screening for your systematic review, some of that noise is going to get filtered out because it's not going to have an abstract for you to read, or you'll recognize that the material is not actually appropriate for what you're trying to pull back. But again, this is where we say, yes, many of the databases do have a limit where you can click off journal articles or peer-reviewed articles or whatever the button is. Don't do it. This goes back to don't use any limits in your database when searching because it introduces bias and it's just not something you should do. You can screen out what's irrelevant. That's going to be the driving force for this. Screen it out, don't worry about it, you'll catch it. So now I'm going to talk about some of the specific databases and coverage of those databases. So for the most part, I would assume health sciences databases are likely going to be your go-to. You may end up having some other subject databases, and that's fine. But for the most part, Embase and MEDLINE are kind of your two go-to for best overall coverage of health sciences material. Cochrane Library is also very important and does have some unique content. CINAHL is your go-to for comprehensive coverage in nursing, allied health, and qualitative research. And PsycInfo is up there because it's got quite a lot of good stuff in PsycInfo, and you never really know what you're going to find. And it's definitely a good place to look if your topic at all leans into a psychology topic. So, if some of these are not familiar to you, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief overview of them. So MEDLINE is a database within the online resource of PubMed provided by the U.S. National Library of Medicine, as Rochelle has mentioned, and the PubMed version of MEDLINE is freely available because it's a government source. But it's also available through paid subscriptions on other platforms. Again, we'll get to platforms in a minute. How many people have used PubMed specifically? Okay, so a few of you. How many people have used MEDLINE on a different platform like Ovid or EBSCO? Okay. So we have access to PubMed, but we also do have a subscription at UMB to Ovid Medline. I don't think we have, do we have EBSCO Medline? No, just Ovid.
Just Ovid.
Okay. And so Medline does include literature published from the 1950s to the present, has citations from over 5,200 different journals from around the world, and has over 40 languages included within the database. So Embase, which is the biggest circle up there, is an Elsevier database that we just recently got a subscription to. Its coverage is from about 1947 to the present. It's got over 32 million records, including Medline titles. Embase itself indexes about 2,900 unique journals. They also have conference abstracts, which is really important for gray literature searching. And some people consider this to be the first place that you should start your systematic review searching. They argue that because the terms in Mtree, so the Embase controlled vocabulary, is apparently it has 3 times as many terms as the MESH database. So that was something I read recently. I have not had a chance to play around with starting with Embase first, because usually I start with PubMed first. Now, you may be noting that the Medline circle is all the way inside the Embase circle. Doesn't go outside at all. So, and you may be thinking, why do I need to search both Embase and Medline if all of Medline is in Embase? Well, I say you still have to search them separately. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say it's standard practice to search them separately.
Yes. Even though it looks like you could just get everything in Embase, because they have 2 different controlled vocabulary, they are going to be bringing back the same articles differently, or Embase isn't going to capture some of the Medline articles in your search because the Medline articles want to be searched and found using the MESH controlled vocabulary. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yes. Where when you're searching Medline in Embase, you're using the Mtree controlled vocabulary, which is not the same as MESH. So you might be missing very important Medline results if you're only searching it through Embase.
So would you say that's similar to using both like subject headings, but then also still searching all the
Keywords.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we also advocate for searching subject headings and keywords.
Yeah, and you'll find when you do a search in Medline and Embase that the overlap is really, really high because of course it's much the same content. But it's just another one of those opportunities to catch everything. It's just one more chance to grab something you might have missed. So yeah, I would say the overlap is going to be pretty significant. You won't get a lot more added to your final list of results. But overall, it's just good practice to do that one extra step to catch something you might miss otherwise.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely when I looked at this and I went, oh, I'm going to have to explain why you still have to search Medline separately, even though it doesn't look like there's unique content. So then we've got Cochrane, which is, we've talked a little bit about Cochrane. It's also subscription access only, has more than just Cochrane reviews in it and protocols. It does have clinical trial records from PubMed and Embase that it pulls in. Synonyms as the go-to for nursing and allied health. It indexes only about 5,500 journals. Also subscription-based, only on the EBSCO platform, right? I've only ever seen it on EBSCO.
It used to be on Ovid.
Okay.
I don't know if it's even available there anymore.
Yeah. As Rochelle mentioned, it does have its own subject headings with Synonyms headings, and you will get more than just journal articles. And PsycInfo is the main psychology database from the American Psychological Association. Again, our subscription is through EBSCO. It's got about 2,500 journals and also books and dissertations, and it does have publications from over 50 countries, 29 different languages, has its own thesaurus of psychological index terms, just to be fun and different. So I've teased this a little bit, but I feel like I need to address platforms. And this is where I also feel like bringing that meme back, but platforms are important to understand. They are the user interface for a database. And so they can affect your search significantly. I've had lots of people tell me that they've searched EBSCO when they've been talking about doing a database search, and I have no idea what database they actually searched, because EBSCO is a platform that houses a ton of databases. So this is why it's important to be specific about what is actually the database and what's actually the platform. And it has become a requirement, at least for JBI. I'm not sure about other places, but now when you're doing your JBI protocol and your JBI review, when you're talking about the databases that you are going to search, you have to include what platform you search them on. And this is, again, for reproducibility. Because if you just say you searched MEDLINE, and I look at your search strategy, I can tell if you searched it through Ovid MEDLINE or PubMed, but that doesn't mean that I could easily recreate it if I didn't understand that, or somebody else didn't understand that. So, depending on what your institution has subscribed to or what you have access to may affect what platform the database is on. So I've already talked about PubMed versus Ovid MEDLINE as two different versions of the same thing. And they do function very differently. They've got a completely different interface. I would argue, and Rochelle would probably disagree with me, that I find PubMed to be way more user-friendly. However, if you were using Ovid MEDLINE to do your searching, you get more advanced features. And that's what we'll get into more next week, because for your systematic reviews, you do want some flexibility with those advanced features. But that's not to say that PubMed doesn't have some benefits. I much prefer finding my mesh headings in PubMed than fighting with Ovid to try and find them. That's just me. And also in PubMed, if you've used it, you may be aware there is a box on your search results that's called the search details box. So depending on what keywords or subject headings you've put in, you can see how PubMed has translated your search and see if anything went wonky or to get other synonym ideas. So there's some benefits to having access to multiple platforms in some cases. In some cases, it's just a preference, you know? I really haven't used, I think MEDLINE is really the only one that I've used that has multiple platforms. Have you used anything on multiple platforms and have to choose?
No.
No. Oh, ERIC is another one.
Ah.
ERIC is an education database that, again, is a government-funded thing in the US. So there is a government-facing website platform, but then it's also on the EBSCO platform. Searching ERIC on its government website is the worst thing in the world. But searching it on the EBSCO platform, you get all of the EBSCO database or the EBSCO platform functionality. So it's a lot nicer. So this is just, again, something to be aware of. We can make recommendations. Again, it's a pro and con thing. I have used Ovid MEDLINE for systematic review searching. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it because I learned how to use MEDLINE on PubMed. And I've only had access to Ovid MEDLINE recently, so it does, you know, sometimes it's whatever you learned first that you're most comfortable with.
I have to defend Ovid MEDLINE.
I'm not saying bad things about it.
No, I know. Okay, so my reasons for preferring Ovid MEDLINE over PubMed, not that Ovid is this fabulous tool.
Its user interface is the worst. You have to admit that.
Yeah,
It's not great.
PubMed's is worse. So I don't like the way PubMed has mesh set up separate from the PubMed search tool.
Fair enough.
Because you can get buried in the meshness of it. But my biggest issue with PubMed is that you can't use asterisks inside quotation marks and get a proper result. It doesn't work. And it's the most annoying thing in the world. So, we'll talk about truncation and phrase searching next week. But it's a really, really important tool where you have like, that says nurse. The video can't see it very well. So up on here for the video's sake, it says NURS with little star and quotation marks around it. And what this does, it's one word. I don't need phrase searching.
No, you don't.
Darn it.
That's why I was going to ask why.
Yeah. Give me something better.
Oh.
This is fun. I hate that this is what comes into my mind. Urinary catheter. I'm not crazy. There's a reason I think this. So up on the board it says urinary catheter with a star after the R and wrapped in quotation marks. This comes to mind for me because I had like 16 students come to my office and ask me a search question about urinary catheters. And yeah, I looked it up on Google and got pictures, which I did not need in my life. But basically what this does is it tells the database to search urinary catheters if it's one word and allows endings to be added to catheter. So urinary catheters, urinary catheterization. It just gives you options that you would have to otherwise search one by one by one, which is what you do in PubMed, because this doesn't work in PubMed, which is my biggest beef against the database. And they're going to fix it someday, and I will like it better.
There is a new version of PubMed coming out this fall.
May they fix that problem. Because it seems like it works. It doesn't produce an error. It looks like it's going to work, and then it just doesn't. Or sorry, it produces results that don't reflect what it should. Okay, had to say it.
No, and I thought you were going to talk more about the proximity searching.
Well, yeah, and it's a thing, and it's okay. Proximity
I know.
searching.
Again, we'll be going into more detail next week, but this is a mini preview of the ins and outs of all of the fun searching things you'll get to do.
Okay, so proximity, like in terms of actual reasons to use one over the other than our personal biases, is proximity searches. It is a tool that is available in Ovid Medline that is not available through PubMed. And we'll talk about what it is and how it works next week. But it's the one sort of hard reason. If you need to use proximity searches, you cannot do it in PubMed. Otherwise, it really is a matter of preference and bias.
Yep. And with proximity searching, again, talking more about it next week, it's easier to translate one search that you've used proximity searching for because you can use it in, I think, every other database.
Everything except PubMed.
So if that is something you want to do, using PubMed instead of Ovid will make translating your search into different databases more challenging. And so it's better to have things as close to similar as possible, and so that may affect which platform you choose to use. So.
Just click the mouse.
Oh yeah, I guess. So we do have other database options out there. You're probably looking at the last slide going, well, where's this database or that database? Other databases exist outside of healthcare. Funny that. And if your topic overlaps with another discipline or is very interdisciplinary to begin with, you should be looking at other databases. So you can do this either by talking to one of us, going to the library subject guides and finding, the topic on education or sociology and seeing what databases are listed. And that can be a good thing. Or when you're looking at other systematic reviews on your topic, you can see what databases they have used to see if maybe your institution has access to them. You don't have to search many if they're outside of your main topic, but you should be searching, a couple, and to be able to justify why you picked that particular sociology database over another if that was the only one you included. Also searching multidisciplinary databases like Scopus or Web of Science. Again, depending on what your institution has access to, these can be really handy. Though the multidisciplinary databases aren't as nice to search. As Rochelle mentioned, they don't tend to have controlled vocabulary. I find they're kind of annoying to export results from, and they're just, I don't know. You get a bunch of results and you're not sure how much is going to be relevant, but you still should search them. And so this is also probably a good time to point out that some of your database selection is going to be dependent on what you personally have access to. So if you are at one institution and you don't have access to any other affiliated institutions' databases, then you are limited to what you have access to. If you're on a team and people do have different affiliations, then you may be able to search databases that you didn't have access to yourself. Not a lot of databases are free, so you're not really going to get away with just being able to search Embase if you don't have a subscription to it. If you have a research grant, there may be, maybe you put in the funding that you're going to pay to get trial to something or pay for somebody else at another institution to search for you, which some libraries at academic institutions will do that for a fee. So this is unfortunately a bias that you do introduce by only being able to access certain databases, but unless there's something you can do about it, it's a bias you kind of have to live with. But for the most part, I would say most academic institutions do have a pretty good range of databases for systematic review searching, so you're probably in a good place. Then there's also things like regional databases, which I just learned about in November myself, which can be useful to help reduce bias. Some of these are free, some of them aren't, some are easy to use, some aren't because they're in different languages. And I've got links in the notes for these, but they're things like Global Index Medicus, African Index Medicus, LILACS, which is the Latin American and Caribbean Health Sciences Literature. There's one for Eastern Mediterranean region, the Southeast Asian region. So they have these regional specific databases that I've never used. Have you used?
No.
No. Has anybody used any of those that I mentioned? No. Again, there's something new that I found out about. Haven't used yet, but might try in the future depending on my topic. Good to be aware of that they exist. So at this point, you may be wondering, how many of these databases do I actually have to search? Do I really have to search more than one? I showed you how comprehensive Embase is. Maybe that's what you're thinking you'll just do. And the answer is yes. You really do have to search in more than one, though I haven't been able to find a consensus on, what the right number of databases is. And that's really not the right question to be asking anyway. You need to think about why you'd search specific databases and be able to justify why you'd search that and not another one. Without going crazy, I would say, keep it reasonable. You're not going to want to try and translate your search into 10 or 12 different databases. I don't know if you've had an upper limit that you've worked with, but
I would say 4 or 5 is normal.
That's what I would think.
It's what you'll see in other systematic reviews when they describe what databases they chose. They'll do 4 or 5. Every once in a while you get someone who gets excited or someone who doesn't. You'll get more or less, but I would say 4 or 5 is about typical.
Yeah, and if your topic is really interdisciplinary, then you may end up searching more just to be able to capture information from education or from sociology or psychology to make sure you aren't missing anything. And that's when it gets a bit crazy, but you're still looking for balance and you're trying to reduce bias. So, if you're not quite sure, that's again where we come in to be able to counsel on what types of databases you should be looking at, when maybe you should stop and what you don't need to search. Because again, I've had researchers want to search Science Direct, and I have to explain that's not a database, I'm not searching that, it is not reproducible, just strike it off your list. But, oh yeah.
And then there are occasionally, like, again, come to your librarian, let us know what you're doing, because you'll find, like, randomly awesome databases. I spoke to Joanne sometime last year and found out that we have a database that deals almost entirely with PTSD. And I was like, I'd never heard of it before. Apparently we subscribed to it for like 4 years. I was like, oh, here's my topic all in one little bubble. So talk to us when you have questions, because every once in a while we do have that perfect database for your topic.
Yeah. But I do have a magic number for you that, I don't know if this is going to depress you or make you happy or what. It's 3% or 3 to 6 articles. So there's been a lot of librarian-led research around conducting systematic reviews, particularly around searching, trying to find best practice, even though, like I say, we don't have standards per se. People are trying to figure out the best ways that we can go about doing this so that we're not always reinventing the wheel every time. So these numbers, 3% or 3 to 6 articles, they come from research done by Handson et al., who found the average percent of studies retrieved making it into a final systematic review. So that's, you've done all your searching, you've screened your articles, you've got the ones that you want to include in your systematic review. They found that average is about 3%, with a range of 3 to 6 articles meeting inclusion criteria per 100 articles examined. So you can sort of use this as a yardstick to measure how comprehensive your search was, and whether your search was broad enough to identify all relevant studies. Which goes back to, I think, what we talked a little bit about last week, that sometimes your numbers for results that you're sifting through will be in the thousands. And that's because you are trying to find those needles in the haystack. The really, really, really relevant stuff is only going to come through when you've got a large pile to dig through, unfortunately. And we'll talk more about that next week, I'm sure, with...
We're talking about a lot next week.
I know. Putting a lot on you. But it just was interesting to kind of put that into play and make you feel a bit better when you do get thousands of results and you're wondering, do I really, really have to sift through all of this? And the answer is, yeah, probably. Because depending on your topic, you may only get 3 to 6 articles for every 100. Okay. You want to talk about getting organized?
Sure.
And I think I might have...
No worries.
Yeah.
I don't really need it.
Okay. I'll just leave my stuff. Because there's your notes anyway. Unless people have questions about databases right now,
Or anything.
so far.
Okay. I will keep this relatively short so that we can take a break and come back and actually do stuff on computers.
Yep.
But this is just the point to talk about organizing. And I mentioned it briefly last week. Systematic reviews have to be systematic and they have to be organized and you have to record everything. So at this stage, as I say, write down your question, choose some keywords, like find some synonyms, record that stuff. Record your keywords, record your controlled vocabulary, record the databases that you search or want to search, record the number of results you get for each search, look at the amount of duplication, look at the date, actually record the date that you did a search so that you know what that was. Record everything somewhere. And there are lots of somewheres. You can just write notes in a notebook, whatever works for you. But I did post to D2L a workbook that I created for my own use when I'm meeting with faculty about their systematic reviews. And the workbook just has a whole bunch of things that you need to think about and write down. So some of it is only relevant to myself or Alex, where it's who's the primary investigator? Who do we talk with if we're not talking to the primary investigator? So that kind of stuff you don't need so much. But it's, what's your question? What are your keywords? What are the synonyms? What databases have you searched? Have you found another systematic review on the topic? What articles do you have already, and why are they relevant? A whole bunch of things you need to think about and keep track of and use to both build your search as you go and to report your search later when you get to the end of the process. So again, I did post that workbook to D2L in the folder for today. And you're welcome to make use of it as much or as little as you want. And that's what I have. Do you have anything else to add? And use Zotero. It will save you.
Yeah, I've created a couple of my own templates for mostly just searching. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I have brainstorming term templates, which are really just Word documents that are tables, and I end up reusing the same ones. Mm-hmm. And then I have search strategy construction tables with line numbers, the words that I'm testing, how many results I got. It's a whole thing, which I'd be happy to share. But yeah, it's really find whatever works for you. You know you have to keep this information, and it's better to keep track of it at the beginning than to try and go back when you're writing your protocol and go, what did I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting organized will save you some time and effort down the road.
And staying organized. Like, I know it's hard, but it is so worth your time to do it right from the start. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I will take one moment to talk about a slightly unrelated topic that I just think needs to be addressed. When I talked about how to create a research question, I talked about PICO, I talked about 3 to 5 chunks. What I didn't talk about is there is a level of trial and failure, guesswork, subjectivity, and how you end up pulling those chunks together. So you start with your 3 to 5 chunks, you write synonyms for all of them, then you go through and think, which ones of these am I actually going to include in my search? Do I need all 5, or can I use just 2 or 3? What will get me where I need to be the most? So the question of experiences, ESL, non-English speaking, immigrants, healthcare, Canada, which of those chunks am I going to actually end up searching? I would say that I'm typically very good at guessing what way to approach a search, although Jordan might disagree with me because we had a lot of trouble about a week and a half ago. But there's trial and error. So just have your 3 to 5 chunks, have words for all of them, and then just try tossing them in databases and pulling them together in different ways in different trials, just to see what produces the best list of results that you can get, and move forward from there. So I just wanted to bring that up now because I want you to take some time to think about how you're going to pull a question together and what pieces of a question you're going to need to think to actually get what you want from a database.
Yeah, this is when it's what do you search versus what do you screen later.
Yes.
And it's a lot easier to screen stuff out than to search on too many concepts and not get enough relevant results. So when you do look at that question, what are the experiences of ESL and non-English speaking immigrants seeking healthcare in Canada? I'm looking at that and I'm definitely searching on experiences. I'm definitely searching on immigrants. And then after that, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think I would do Canada searching. But even there, I mean, it's hard to do a search that limits to Canada. It's hard.
Yeah. But if that's your limiting factor, then that might be what you search on. Because if you limit it to healthcare, your synonyms for healthcare are insane. Because, healthcare can mean everything, right? And you're already using a health database.
So it's like searching health in a health database. It's really not helpful to you.
Yeah. And for your topic of ESL and non-English speaking, is that more going to come out when you're actually looking at the abstract and the full text? Is it more important that your population are immigrants? And so these are the things that you have to consider when you start building a search. I'm working on a scoping review. Jeez, it's like all I do is work on scoping reviews. That we've gone back and forth on the topic within the question to go, do we really need to search on the age category, or can we screen that out later? Just because of the nature of the question, it's like, okay, if your question is about young adults' experiences as they're transitioning out of, like, from pediatric to adult care, do you really need to search on the concept of age, or is that going to come out in your results and something that you can screen? And so you're not limiting your search. So it's sometimes not an easy answer which of your pieces of your question that you're going to search on until you start playing around with it.
Yep. Trial and error, guesswork, and trying your best to read a database's mind, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't.
Yeah. I've had to go back to another group that I'm working with and ask them to refine their question, because the concept that I'm trying to search on is too broad. And it's pulling back tens of thousands of results, even with the other search concepts that I'm trying to search on. And that's just, you can get a sense of what's too many pretty quickly. And tens of thousands means your question isn't really focused enough, even if it is a scoping review. So.
Okay. So I think that's good for now.
Yep.
We'll take a break and be back at, say, 10:45.